Well, greetings there. It's Visitors Day at the Paper Prison. I want to thank everyone who's come by to visit me here in my lockup and isolation. Um, as you can see, I'm eschewing my usual format of having the hand-drawn aha version of David here speaking to you, partly because I don't really have a lot of time these days, but also this is going to be kind of a serious episode because we lost two very important talents in the comics industry this year. In the space of a month, we lost Jim Shooter and Peter David. I know that on this channel, I like to focus on the visual arts of comic book creation, but everyone that contributes to the creation of a comic book is vital and important and brings something to the table that's just unique and beautiful and special. And it all begins with the writer. So, and these are two very important writers. I haven't taken the time to write a script. I'm going to see if I can just do this off the cuff, off the top of my head. We're going to start with Jim Shooter. And also, speaking about Peter David, also, there's going to be, or there has been, a lot of eulogies and articles and summaries of their career, lauding their works and their accomplishments, all of them earned. So I don't want to go over the same well trodden ground. I want to talk about how these men affected me personally because I did get to meet them a little bit. I did get to work with them a little bit. I won't say I knew them, but I had experiences that I can talk about. So let's start with Jim Shooter. When I was growing up, wanting to be work in the comic book industry, I idolized Jim Shooter's career. It just seems so mythic. I mean, let's face it, a 13-year-old basically cold calls or sends a submission package to DC Comics, and the editor opens up and sees something there and reaches out back to him in basically a small town in PA, Pennsylvania. It's impossible to imagine that now. And it's just reminding me that someone pointed out that my generation is the last generation that will remember the world without an internet. And that's how he had to accomplish this. Just on pure guts and personality and stick-to-itiveness, although he seemed to hit a home run on the first pitch, but hey, more power to him. So we have a kid who I was able to read, uh, I wasn't reading comics in the 60s, but I've since looked at some of the things he wrote then. I I could not have guessed that a kid wrote those books. Now, technically, he was under the tutelage of Morse Weisinger. And, maybe writing comics was better than working in a factory in Pennsylvania, but Mort was just as punishing and just as much of a child labor taskmaster as any factory head would have been. It really sounded Dickensian because, he would just yell at young Jim Shooter when he was, if he didn't write perfectly. I'm sure Shooter was a very intelligent boy for his age. At the very least, he could spell, he could type, and he could write a story. But I'm sure Mort kept upping his game and telling him, "Okay, that thing you did there, not good. Excise that. That thing you did there, good. More of that." So we have a guy that before he was even out of high school was a professional with years of experience in the original American art form of comic books. That's amazing. Now, we all have heard the stories of how, he came back to comics after college or mid-college, however it worked out, and, started back at DC, his home, where he started, and then moved over to Marvel, and he, of course, started writing at Marvel, and also, I think, probably did some associate editing, and while he was there, he wrote two of my favorite Marvel comics. I don't want to get into the weeds here, but it was, the Bride of Ultron story in Avengers and What If number 3, both of them Avengers stories. And it's pretty much, agreed upon that these were incredible stories. Um, people fight over which is better, the Bride of Ultron or Giant Size Avengers #2. But I'm a little saddened that people forget in the mix that run of Daredevil he did, especially since everything is overshadowed by Frank Miller's Daredevil. But those Daredevil comics he wrote were incredibly entertaining and fun to read, and they had a professional deftness to them. It was someone had the fire of youth, but also with a decade of experience in comics already. I'm really sorry that people have forgotten his time on Daredevil, and I don't care who you are, or how good your work was on Daredevil, as Ann Nocenti or Shooter or anyone else who has written it since then, Mark Waid. You just get buried under the Frank Miller avalanche. So anyway, as careers do, Jim's evolved and he got more into management, where he was like running the overall, ethos, which is a word I'm seeing abused so much now, of Marvel Comics and by extension comics in general. As Marvel went, so went the industry. And here's the thing. There's a lot of people who say they don't like Shooter. Just as many people would give their right arm for him in the artistic community. It'll be funny that way, because here's the thing. Shooter was getting in management. You cannot be in management and not make enemies. I've been a manager, been a supervisor. There's some people I've been able to help, and there's some people I've had to say no to. So I understand that part of his life differently than someone who's never been there. So, because of that, Shooter found himself on the outs at Marvel, literally out at Marvel. But being who he is, he starts a company, Valiant, which really, landed. I mean, just made an impact. Also scared Marvel a lot. Again, you make enemies in management, and again, he's pushed out of Valiant. And then he starts another company, Defiant, and that's where I ran into him. I was doing a little work, a little inking, you could call it staff artist stuff there. I got to be in his orbit, get to watch his management style. And what I think I saw was a guy who was a good guy, but maybe didn't have any people skills, because when you work in this way, it's a very solitary existence. You're not building up your people skills, but he tried, and he honestly loved fans, and he loved the artistic community, and if he could help you, he would. And if he didn't help you, it's because he couldn't, because he did not have the power to. That's how I took it. Like I said, this episode is my experiences with Shooter. Like I said, a lot of people said they didn't like him, but all I can say is that my experiences with him were overwhelmingly positive. Maybe I was lucky. Maybe we didn't get into a position where he had to sit me down and fire me or tell me my stuff wasn't good. But he also helped me out with some self-publishing that I was doing. And that was really kind of him, very open. He went on to make, and then the comics industry did something none of us can foresee. It started to crash because all of publishing was crashing. So he went on to another company, and then he did other things that I'm not aware of, but he kept busy, kept working. And as with all men, as all of us, the flesh betrays us, and he apparently came down with esophageal cancer, and I could see that he was diminishing, and I was hoping it was just age. I didn't know he was sick, but I said something might be wrong here. And I really, I still idolized him. And by a strange quirk of coincidence, as he aged, he started to look like my father, which was freaking me out at some point. Um, and we all know the end. He passed, leaving quite a legacy. So many people entertained, so many people maybe even comforted. Yes, a lot of people feel that they got, that their lives were lessened or harshened by him. Again, you cannot be in management and not make enemies. But like I said, it's a mythic career. As I think I mentioned earlier, that there isn't going to be any more Jim Shooters. Not just because he came up in a time when there was no internet. However, the kids of today break into comics or become good at what they do, it's going to be way different than how Shooter did. And that's all I can say right now. As far as my dealings with him, they were overwhelmingly positive. I'm not going to say we were friends, but he would pick up the phone when I would call him and, pep talk me. That was great. So the next person we're going to talk about is Peter David, another writer who made an impact and was very important. Peter was able to make I think he was probably Jim's age, or between Jim's and mine. He was able to excel in the world that the Jim Shooters made. Now, I'm not trying to diminish what he accomplished. I think if there wasn't a Jim Shooter, Peter David would have broken in and been successful in his own ways. But he was a very smart man, and he knew how to distinguish himself from all the other talents out there. Some would say, and some want to make it sound like the only thing he brought to the table was a sense of humor. I think that's a little unfair, especially when you read his prose work. There's a lot of craft and a lot of know-how, and he was a real writer, and he made. You take a book like The Hulk, which is like on the verge of cancellation, and bring it back from the brink, and in a way, again, like just how everyone copies Frank Miller when they work on Daredevil, everyone's thinking about Peter David if they work on the Hulk now. And the other thing I want to say about him being very smart, because if you're going to excel in the comics industry or in any of the creative arts, you got to have your business hat on. You cannot just have one customer. That is to say, what if Peter David only worked at DC Comics, and then one day DC Comics said, "We don't like you anymore"? What's he going to do? So Peter made sure he had lots of clients. So he worked at Marvel, he worked at DC, he worked at Nickelodeon, he worked at Ballantine. He wrote novels, he wrote TV, he wrote comics. I think he wrote at least one movie script. I'll have to look that up. That got produced, but he wrote movie scripts. See, that's what you got to do. You cannot have one customer for your work. Life isn't easy for anyone in this world. Particularly, it's not easy for people in the creative industries. It's my opinion, and it's just my opinion. I'm not saying I'm an authority here, but I think the average creator has about 5 or 10 years in him before he burns out of what he has. Now you have guys like Frank Miller, who knew to reinvent himself every 5 to 10 years, so he remained fresh and new. Not many people in the arts can do that. You just can't make that decision that I'm going to constantly reinvent myself. You either can or you can't. That's the other thing I would say about Peter David. He knew how to survive in a very cruel industry that whose mantra is pretty much, "What have you done for me lately?" And unfortunately, as the moment corporations discovered that comic books could be a profitable enterprise, they stuck their nose into it and just turned it into a predatory, you know, meat grinder of a factory. And where there was once where you could have you know a living with a modicum of dignity and self-respect, that become next to impossible. Uh, as with Jim Shooter, the flesh can betray, and his own health issues, caught up with him, as they will with all of us. I mean, I'm not going to live forever, and I'm not going to talk about his individual health issues, because we all have them, and we're all going to end with them. But they caught up with him, and his time passed again, leaving a legacy of incredible work and hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of entertained and happy fans. And all of us can pick up those books by Jim Shooter or Peter David at any time and read them again. And in those moments, we reconnect with these people, even though they've passed on, shuffled off this mortal coil. We're still connecting with them. I honestly believe that comics are unique in that when you look at a comic, you can feel how much work a creator put into it. You can feel it. You can tell, oh, this guy kind of hacked it, or this guy must have spent days on this page, or this guy, really cared. Well, I'm sorry it's taken me this long to talk about these gentlemen. None of them were perfect. All of them were all too human. Oh, by the way, and I worked with Peter David. He helped me out on my little publishing title. So that's how, the connection. I mean, the fact that he even did it, because I'm sure he was very busy. I paid very little, but I paid. The fact that he did it, I'll always be very appreciative. So we say goodbye to Peter David and especially Jim Shooter. And I don't know even if the comics that they worked on could even be done today, because it's so much done by committee and oversight, and it's just product. It's hard to be art. They made art, and these days comics make product. But I'm really glad I got to read their stuff, and I'm glad I grew up in the pre-internet age, where the only way I could have read it was off a spinner rack, lying on the floor with my milk and cookies, reading comics. Well, I guess visiting hours are over, so I got to go back to solitary confinement. And until next time, be well, everyone. Adios.